There is a great debate today on whether Ambedkar is anti-colonial or not. In this book, you argue that Ambedkar was able to discern the strengths and limits of British colonialism, as well as the strength and limits of India's anti-colonial movement, what is popularly known as the national movement in India. Does this make him an anti-colonial thinker?
That's a great question. Ambedkar's approach towards colonialism was complex. He thought that colonialism in India and probably elsewhere in the world intervenes with a promise to establish a kind of a public order in which rights will prevail and people would have access equally to the larger social domain. Therefore, formally, he saw some of the colonial promises as holding out a kind of future in India to the untouchable communities and to the Adivasis and to the other oppressed sections. He argued that these colonial promises rarely came to be realized. And whenever there was a clash, and generally it was the case, colonial interests would prevail over all the promises that they made. And Ambedkar reiterates this particular argument about the hollowness of the colonial promise. At the same time, he points out that colonialism has come to benefit the hitherto dominant sections in India, an argument that he actually picks up from one of his gurus, Jyoti Rao Phule, and demonstrates how the dominant sections in India, particularly the upper caste, had benefited enormously from colonial rule. Their control over the lower sections in India came to be buttressed in the process. Ambedkar takes up a similar kind of attitude towards the national movement. Ambedkar thinks that the national movement held up the promise of the future. He often uses the term Swaraj and begins to say that the future of the exploited communities in India, those in the social margins, lies in Swaraj. And therefore, colonialism has to be done away with. However, national movement would keep its promise only if it actually begins to develop an internal critique of itself. You cannot fight for the freedom of the nation while you are keeping the rest of the nation under your domination. And this can be achieved only by a reflective attention paid to the social layers that national movement came to encompass. And Ambedkar thought that it was not sufficiently self-reflective of itself. He thought that initially Gandhi held out that kind of a promise of a internal self-reflectivity, but eventually faced with the assertion of the upper caste and the dominant social layers in India, Gandhi would not push forward his action, and often Gandhi employed the idea of non-violence to defend his own shortcomings in this regard.